Hello, students. You are welcome to the third topic of this course on EDU321 Psychology of Learning. In this lesson, we're still looking at the theories of learning, but this time around, we are focusing on Thorndike's theory of connectionism and Skinner's theory of operant conditioning, two of the theories of learning. Both of these theories belong to they are categorized under behaviorist theories of learning. Recall that we said that behaviorist theories focus mainly on external observable behavior to explain why learning takes place. So we are looking at these two theories, but first of all, we'll consider Thorndike's theory. We'll look at the tenets of his theory. We'll look at the three laws propounded by Thorndike, and then we'll consider the classroom implications of this theory, how you are going to apply the principles of this theory to your classroom situation. Thereafter, we will now look at the Skinner's theory of operant conditioning. We'll look at the principles of the theories. We'll look at the major concepts in his theory, such as the concept of reinforcement, the concept of punishment, and we'll compare the two, reinforcement and punishment, and then look at the classroom implications of this theory. So students, sit back and enjoy the lesson. Thank you. Yeah, like I said, we are starting off with Thorndike's theory of connectionism. Thereafter, we will treat Skinner's theory of operant conditioning. Okay. So what are the learning outcomes, the intended learning outcomes of this lesson? After completing the lessons of this topic 3, you'll be able to describe the tenets of Thorndike's theory of connectionism. You will describe the laws of learning propounded by Thorndike and enumerate classroom implications of the theory. Then you will describe the basic principles of Skinner's operant conditioning theory. You will explain the difference between reinforcement and punishment, and you'll be able to explain the schedules of reinforcement and discuss the implications of operant conditioning theory to the classroom situations. Okay, so we're starting off with Thorndike's theory of connectionism. What is the theory of connectionism? According to Thorndike, all learning, mind you, we are still explaining theories of learning, how different personalities have come up to explain what learning, how learning takes place. And for Thorndike, he said all learning involves the formation of connections or bonds between a stimulus and a response. These connections, according to him, they become strengthened or weakened by the nature and frequency of the stimulus-response pairings. I'm going to briefly explain the experiment he conducted that will help us understand the whole idea of the theories and principles of this theory. Thorndike conducted an experiment with a hungry cat, which he locked up in a box. Inside that box is a lever which the cat can press. If the cat presses on that lever, the box will open up and it will go out. The cat will go out to eat the food that was placed outside the box. So it is the cat that will execute all these responses, all this pressing on the lever and getting out of that box. After much trial and error, trying to get himself out of that box, he eventually learned to associate press. He got it right the first, second time, attempt, at different stages. He got it right. He mistakenly pressed on that lever, which got him out of the box and enabled him to escape from the box and eat the food. So after several of these trials and error attempts, the cat then learned to associate pressing the lever with opening the door and escaping. That pressing of the lever in this particular case becomes the stimulus, something you have to execute. You have to do it to give you the result you want. And that result is the response, becomes the response, which is the opening of the door of that box and escaping to eat the food. So this stimulus response connection became established because it results in a satisfying state of affairs. So that is basically the experiment conducted by Thorndike to explain his theory of connectionism. And he believes that all learning involves this formation of connections between a stimulus and a response. That's how he explained learning. So from this experiment he conducted, he propounded 3 laws. We are going to look at those laws. One of them is the law of effect. The second one is the law of exercise. The third one is the law of readiness. So we look at the law of effect. What does it say? This law states that if a stimulus results in a positive outcome, it strengthens the stimulus response bond. While if it results in a negative outcome, the stimulus response bond is weakened. Now, let's look at the case of that cat, the cat that was put in the locked up box. That cat, after extricating himself from that box, that is pressing on the lever, he learned to press on that lever because he knew that if he presses on that lever, the lever will open up, the box will open for it to escape. And for it to escape, it will now eat the food that was placed outside the box. That food was able to satisfy the cat's hunger. So he derived satisfaction from that experience he got on pressing on the lever. So because that experience gave him satisfaction, he's going to do it more and more in the future. That is what the law of effect says. If a stimulus results in a positive outcome, that outcome, getting out of that box and eating up the food, is the outcome of his action, the action of the cat. It will strengthen the stimulus response bond. The stimulus there is the pressing of the lever, and the response there is getting out of that prison box and getting himself the food. So let's apply it to learning situation. It means that behaviors that are followed by positive responses of the learners will be repeated, likely to be repeated. You ask a question and a child answers that question correctly. Next time you ask a different type of question, that child will want to raise his or her hands up to answer the question because of that experience of receiving satisfaction. And if the child, and let me start with the cat, if the cat was able to come out of that box, and outside the box, somebody is there with a cane and and gave the cat some, lashes of the cane. Do you think when the cat finds himself inside the box, he wants to press on that lever to get out of the box? No, because of what? Because of that negative response he received outside the box. So the same thing applies to learners. The same thing applies to us. So what it is trying to tell us is that learning occurs only when responses are followed by reward and satisfaction. Look at this concept that Thorndike used: reward, satisfaction. These are key concepts in his theory. On the other hand, if frustration or punishment is experienced by the learner or by the cat, the connection between the stimulus, which is the pressing of the lever, and the response, which is getting out of that locked box, becomes weakened. The cat wouldn't have that urge to press on that lever because he's receiving punishment at the end of the day when he gets out of that box. That is basically what the law of effect is telling us about. If there's any learner in your class who tries to answer, raises his hand or her hand to answer your question, and he didn't get the question right, and the child ended up being humiliated by the teacher, do you think that child want to raise up the hand to answer question next time? No, I'm sure you agree with me that that child wouldn't do that because of that experience, negative experience that he got or she got. So that is the first law of effects. I'm sure you can apply that to your own situation in the classroom. Let's look at the second law of learning. That is the law of exercise. This law is divided into two parts. One, the law of use, and two, the law of disuse. The law of use states that the more often an association between a stimulus and a response is made, the stronger the connection will be. The more often, we're still using the cat in the box, the more often that cat inside the box gets himself extricated from the box, locked up box, and is able to eat the food that is placed outside the box, the stronger the connection will be between pressing on the lever and getting out of the box. The stronger it will be. The cat will be motivated to be pressing on that lever to enable it to get out of the box, since it is his action that will determine whether he's coming out of the box or not. On the other hand, the more you do, okay, let's take it this way. It means this law of use, in other words, it means that the more you do something, the better you are good at it. In other words, practice makes perfect. We always use that phrase in our lives. Oh, we say, oh, practice makes perfect, but you never know. You are actually illustrating one of the laws of Thorndike about learning. Yes, practice makes perfect. The more you do something, the better you are good at it. The more you learn something, the better you are good at it. The more the learners in your class answer questions, the more they want to answer more and more, and the more the more they become sharp about the question they are answering. So what about the law of disuse? It's just the opposite of the law of use. The law of disuse says that the longer an association between a stimulus and a response is unused, the weaker it becomes. That cat inside the box, and we keep on making reference to that cat, for it to facilitate understanding. That cat inside the box, like I said before, I said if maybe at the end of the day, the cat was able to press on the lever and get himself out of the box, and instead of receiving the food outside, it receives cane, lashes of. So do you think next time the cat will want to press on that lever? No. No, your guess is as good as mine. The answer is no, he wouldn't. And the cat might just remain in that box, filled with hunger and not knowing what to do. So at a time, he might even forget where the position of the liver is placed. Might even forget as time goes on. That's what the law of disuse is talking about, that the lack of practice brings about forgetting. If you have ever learned how to drive a car and you give yourself a break for about maybe 10 years, 8 years, I bet you the first time you want to drive a car after those number of years, you will almost not get it right unless you are put through again. So that is the law of exercise with its two parts, the law of use and the law of disuse. So let's look at the third of the laws, the third one, the law of readiness. Readiness. Most times we teachers, we use readiness. We already know what readiness, the concept of readiness in learning means. It's almost the same thing with Thorndike's law of learning. It states that a particular state of affairs will prove to be satisfying to the extent that the subject is ready for it. That is, a learner, a child will learn best only when the child is ready to learn. You cannot force a horse to the river. We also say that proverb. Most of these are sayings are derived from some of these laws of learning. You cannot force a child to learn. That is basically what it is talking about, law of readiness. You cannot push a 2-year-old child, for instance, into a class that is meant for a 6-year-old child, maybe primary 1 that is meant for 5, 6-year-old children. That 2-year-old child will not understand what is going on, will not follow up on the learning. So in another aspect about the law of readiness, when a student, even if it's a 6-year-old child in the right class, in primary 1, the child becomes exhausted and ill, and cannot learn. That such a child cannot learn. So such a child can only learn when he's fit, when he's strong. That's another aspect of that law of readiness. A child can only learn when that child is ready to learn. That is the law of readiness. So having discussed the 3 laws of learning propounded by Thorndike, let's look at the classroom implications, some of the classroom implications. These are not all. I've uploaded the lesson note. Normally, I have 2 types of instructional content I always upload for you students. I have the lesson note, which I've already uploaded, and this one is part of the lesson videos. So you will have 2. You are lucky to have 2 of the instructional materials. You have the lesson notes that you will read, and you also have this that you can watch. For those of you who understand materials better by watching. I did those 2 different instructional resources to facilitate your understanding for those who read better and understand better, and for those who watch and understand better. So these are just some of the classroom implications of Thorndike's theory. Concerning the readiness aspect of it, it is an important condition for learning, as we have seen in its laws. So therefore, the teacher is advised to consider the mental and cognitive capability of the learners when planning the instructional content. Consider if you're giving them an instructional content that is above their mental and cognitive stage of development, you are like punishing them. You are making them not ready to absorb the content of your instruction. Then the teacher should recognize the fact that students will like to repeat the actions for which they receive positive regards. Who can tell me the law that this particular point is making reference to? Who can tell me? Yeah, That's a law of effect. Yeah. The teacher should recognize the fact that the students will like to repeat the actions for which they received positive regards. Hence, praise and encouragement that give pleasure and satisfaction should be provided to sustain the interest of the learners. Yes, even where the student is not getting it right, don't put that child down. If you put that child down, you're pushing that child away. You are making the child humiliated. You are making the child to hate the classroom, to hate learning. So the teacher, you as the teacher, should try to use more of praise and encouragement. We'll come back to this use of praise and, and all of that when we are treating Skinner's theory. Okay, the teacher should recognize the importance of practice in the learning process. Learning may not occur unless practice is reinforced. Who can tell me the law, one of the laws that this point is making reference to? Yeah, the teacher should recognize the importance of practice in the learning process. Learning may not occur until practice is reinforced. Practice. Yeah, you are correct. That is the law of exercise. Practice makes perfect. Practice makes perfect. Okay. At this juncture, I would like you to pause the video and try to attempt the following class activity. This is the first one before you continue watching the video. Okay, after that, let's look at the second aspect of the theory, Skinner's theory of operant conditioning. Skinner's theory of operant conditioning. Here you are going to learn about the principles of the theory. I want you to know that another name for operant conditioning is instrumental conditioning. You either say Skinner's theory of instrumental conditioning or Skinner's theory of operant conditioning. You're saying the same thing. Operant conditioning theory emphasizes reinforcement for behaviors. Emphasizes reinforcement for behaviors. So we'll all look at that together. The basic premise of the theory was that behaviors are strengthened or weakened according to their consequences. That is, their future probability of occurrence is either increased or decreased by the immediate presence of a reward or punishment. Look at this, this point being made critically. Can you tell me, can any of you tell me which of Thorndike's laws is a bit related to this? Can any of you look at it and consider what we have said about Thorndike? Which of his laws has some relationship with this point, with the theory of operant conditioning? Yes, you are correct. That is the law of effect. Law of effect. Actually, Skinner borrowed a leaf from that particular law to derive his own principles. And he maintained that behaviors are strengthened or weakened according to their consequences. That is, according to their result, the outcome. The outcome of whatever you are doing will determine whether the behavior will be strengthened in the sense of whether it will be repeated in future. The likelihood of repeating the same behavior will depend on the positive outcome of the response. So it is Also noteworthy to observe that Skinner's theory is built on the concept of reinforcement and punishment. We are going to look at the ideas, what it feels about the concept of reinforcement and punishment, and we will relate his perspectives of what he thinks with our present situation, especially here in Nigeria. And then we shall let's take a more detailed look at these two concepts. There are two forms of reinforcement: positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. What is positive reinforcement? Positive reinforcement, please note that we are now coming now into the different concept ideas in Skinner's theory, the different concepts and ideas and terminologies. Positive reinforcement, according to Skinner, has to do with adding something pleasant or positive in order to increase a behavior. For instance, if a child in your class or a child in your home does something good, normally what's always your reaction? Do you praise that child? Do you smile at that child? Do you give a nod, or do you give a thumbs up? Do you give a pat on the back of the child? Which of them do you do? Or do you just keep quiet without appreciating the good response of that child? Yes, those things you do to acknowledge the good response of that child, those things are called positive reinforcement. That is what they are called, positive reinforcers, like smiling at the child, praising the child with phrases like good, well done, Dupe, well done, John, well done, Mary, fantastic. I like how you are sitting down on your chair and reading your books. Oh, good, well done. It's always good to call the name of the child and the good thing the child is doing for emphasis sake. It's always good. It has been shown that just saying good, well done, without any other information added, without describing what the child has done to earn the remarks, the good remarks, is incomplete. It's an incomplete remark. So you have to say good, oh, well done, Mary. Call the name of the child and mention that thing, that action, the positive action that the child is doing to earn those beautiful remarks. So those beautiful remarks that you give to the children, to the learners, to acknowledge the good thing they've done, are called positive reinforcement. Which of the positive reinforcement do you often use in your class? It's always advisable not to just keep quiet or keep silent. When you see a child doing a good thing, please always give them praise, because that will spur them on to do, to continue to be doing the good thing. That is what the principles of Skinner's theory is talking about. To always spur them on. And it's the same thing that the law of effect under Thorndike's law, Thorndike's theory is talking about. And what is negative reinforcement? It involves in negative reinforcement, an undesirable stimulus is avoided or removed to increase the desired behavior. Here, you are engaged in an action in order to avoid a negative response, in order to avoid a negative result. For instance, let's say in the class, a teacher wants to penalize students for not completing their homework by charging them 200 naira. I'm sorry, I'm using this 200 naira as citing it as an example. I'm not encouraging you to maybe do that. I just use this point as an example to illustrate the meaning of negative reinforcement. It's just for illustrative purposes, please. I'm not asking you to go charge 200 naira in your class. Okay. So if you do not complete your homework, you will give your teacher 200 naira. You will notice that the student or the learner will want to complete their homework to avoid paying 200 naira. So that thing they avoid doing in order to increase the desired behavior of completing their homework is called negative reinforcement. That thing they avoid doing, that 200 naira they avoid paying, because it's going to increase the desired behavior of completing the homework. That is negative reinforcement. In negative reinforcement, you are removing. In positive reinforcement, you are adding in order to increase a desirable behavior. In negative reinforcement, you are removing in order to increase a desirable behavior. You see the difference between the two reinforcements, the two types of reinforcement. And it is instructive to note that positive and negative in this case do not mean good and bad. Negative reinforcement does not mean bad reinforcement. In fact, it is also a good reinforcement because the end result is what matters. Here, you are trying to increase the desired behavior of that child by the child avoiding to do something. So it does not mean bad. It only means that you are adding or removing. For positive reinforcement, you are adding. That's positive. For negative reinforcement, you are removing. So they do not mean bad or good. Let's continue. What about punishments? Just like reinforcement, the same here, there are two forms of punishment. You have positive punishment and negative punishment. In positive punishment, you are adding an undesirable stimulus to decrease or stop a behavior. Examples of positive reinforcement is like spanking, beating, telling a child, stupid, abusing a child, giving a knock on the child. You are adding something, but this time around, you are adding an undesirable stimulus. You're adding something. Nobody wants to be spanked. Nobody wants to be beaten. Nobody wants to be knocked on the head. So it's an undesirable stimulus. You are adding it in order to increase or stop a behavior. But unfortunately, this notion has been revised. Skinner has noticed that it does not stop. When you beat a child for misbehaving, for instance, it doesn't mean that that child will stop that bad behavior. In fact, a lot of studies have been carried out that show that the more you even beat that child, the more that problem will escalate. The more the child will continue to be doing that bad thing. So punishment, giving or adding, giving positive punishment does not decrease. It has been found, and Skinner himself has revised this aspect of his law, of his principle, of his theory. In our local language, or within the terminology we are familiar with, we can equate positive punishment as corporal punishment. Corporal punishment, which is the terminology we are most familiar with in our own climb here, So asking students, oh yeah, go and kneel down, as a way of punishing them or as a way of modifying their behavior, it has been proven that such methods, such strategies do not work. They are not effective. In fact, they help in increasing the bad behavior, and I'm sure you don't want to use such strategy. We will still talk about this as we proceed in the discussion. What about negative punishment? Listen, look at the difference between negative punishment and positive punishment. In positive punishment, you are adding something undesirable. You are adding spanking, caning, you are adding. But in negative punishment, you are removing something pleasant. You are removing something pleasant in order to decrease or stop a bad behavior. That's the difference. For instance, taking away, if you see your child fighting over a PS4, if you see maybe two of your children fight, or adolescent children fighting over PS4 that you bought for them, you might decide to take away that PS4. You take it away, that, you know, before you take away anything to show the example of negative punishment, it has to be something that the child likes. It has to be something that the learner in the class likes. So when you remove that PS4 from that and tell them that, see, you are seizing this thing for 2 weeks, unless they behave well, I bet you, if it's actually what they really like very well, after 1 day, 2 days, they want to behave well, so they can get back. They can get back their PS4 item. So the same way in the classroom, maybe you notice a learner that likes playing football during break time, during the recess, during the break time, and then that child happens to do a bad thing or happens to behave badly in class, and you want to give, instead of using positive punishment, that is, instead of using corporal punishment, you decide to use other forms of punishment that will not mean causing harm to the child or causing abuse on the child. You might want to ask the child to remain in class while others go on break. You know, I tell you, if that child actually likes playing football, after that day, that punishment you have given, that is the negative punishment you have given, the child will want to sit up and not do the action for which he was punished. So that is the power of negative punishment. So instead of using corporal punishment, you know, you can also use negative punishment. You are not inflicting any harm on the child. You are not abusing the child. You are not ridiculing the child. You are only taking away one thing that the child likes. And then please make sure that when the child returns or does something good, that is when the child is not behaving well, make sure you return that item that you have seized. You know, that action will, you know, will help to reinforce the changed behavior. So let's go on. So having looked at the two terms in reinforcement, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment. Let's look at, okay, this slide has been able to combine all of the four terms. All of the four terms. You can see here a positive reinforcement has to do with something pleasant. This is just like a summary of all we have discussed. Positive, you take this, journey with this, it becomes positive reinforcement. And this is the definition of what we just described. Take positive and then punishment becomes positive punishment. Look at it here. Negative reinforcement, that is it here. And the same thing here. So this is just an illustrative table or to show the different concepts we have discussed. Okay, moving on, let's see what okay, yeah, we talked about corporal punishment, which Skinner referred to as positive punishment. Remember I said Skinner does not approve of it. He rather said we should emphasize more of positive reinforcement. So corporal punishment, e.g. beating a child for misbehaving in the class, has been associated with several problems. We have other examples like slap that we do, that we as parents or we as teachers, we have used at one time or the other. It's not advisable to continue using it because it's causing a great harm on our students, on our learners. You have slapping, knocking a child's head with a knuckle, asking students to kneel down on hard surfaces, threatening to beat, yelling, verbal abuse, ridiculing, name calling. You know, I don't blame some of us, because we used to think that the more you do some of these things, the better the child will be. No, it has been, it has a counter effect, it's counterproductive. You know, it shows a counterproductive effect on the child, because it's associated with a lot of problems. It causes a lot of problems on the child, for which you as the parents or the teacher wouldn't want to encourage in your classroom. The only good thing, the only positive, not good, the only positive outcome that punishment, corporal punishment shows is that it leads to immediate compliance. If you ask a student, for instance, you give the student 5 strokes of cane to do something, the child will want to do it in order to avoid being punished. That's all, because of the pain, you know, the student is receiving. That's all. It leads to immediate compliance. You know, punished behavior is never eliminated through the use of corporal punishment. It's never eliminated. The only is just suppressed. That thing is just suppressed. As soon as you leave that scene, the child will continue with behaving badly, because the child didn't learn anything by just being punished. It didn't learn anything. In fact, it creates a lot of problems. We are going to see some of the problems and consequences of corporal punishment in the next slide. Okay, research. They are not my words. So I got all this from the research that have been carried out throughout the decades. In the past decades, some researches have been carried out, and I know some of you are aware of this, you know, that corporal punishment causes a lot of harm on children. It can cause children to become more aggressive and prone to antisocial behavior and delinquency. Start beating a child for just committing a little misbehavior, and see how that misbehavior will escalate. It will even go and bring his brothers, that misbehavior, it will go and bring all the other agents, all the associated misbehaviors, you know. So that is why it's never encouraged to use corporal punishment frequently on the child. There are other methods you can use to correct or modify the child's behavior. Yeah, corporal punishment may lead to lying. Yes, lying. Many parents have complained about this. Yes, children learn to tell lies in order to avoid punishment. Corporal punishment hardens the child instead of correcting them. Yes, it's a fact. Corporal punishment does not guide the child towards the desired behavior. It is a fact. Corporal punishment causes fear, it causes anxiety, it causes withdrawal, it causes timidity. I bet you, as parents, as teachers, you wouldn't want to inflict all this punishment on your child, and given all these outcomes about, please read them up. You know, they are also there in your lesson notes, and also here in the lesson video. So for these reasons, corporal punishment should be used very sparingly in classroom settings, please, even in homes. While positive reinforcement should be emphasized. Even if you want to correct a bad behavior, start using positive reinforcement on the child for displaying good behavior. The more you use that positive reinforcement, the more the bad behavior will be reducing, because you are only emphasizing on the good behavior. Just focus on the good behavior of that child. Focus on it. The more you do it, the stronger the stimulus response association or connection will become. Just apply some of these principles and try to see whether it works or not. That's the best way to go. Please, let's use more of positive reinforcement in our homes and in our classrooms. Yeah, schedules of reinforcement. Skinner's theory focuses on a system of reinforcement. We have said that before. The best way to teach or modify a behavior is to use positive reinforcement. We have also emphasized that. So what is reinforcement schedule or schedules of reinforcement? It is a rule that specifies when and how often a desired behavior will be reinforced. A reinforcement schedule is divided into two broad categories. You have the continuous schedules and you have the intermittent schedules, which is also called partial schedules. What is continuous schedule? A continuous schedule is a situation whereby you, the teacher, you reinforce a child's behavior. Let me put it this way. It is every correct response or behavior that the child exhibits, you want to reinforce, you want to reward with words like, oh, good, Josephine, good. That is good of you for doing. You will mention, like I said before, mention that good thing that the child has done. Don't just end up with saying good. It's incomplete. It's not descriptive. That is continuous reinforcement. Anytime you see that child does something good, you want to reinforce. It's straightforward. Intermittent reinforcement, also straightforward. You don't give reinforcement for every good behavior that the child exhibits. You give reinforcement now, and you wait. Maybe after another 2 or 3 times the child has done something good, you reinforce again by smiling or by nodding. Remember, we have mentioned the different ways of giving positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement. It's not only by saying good, or where you can also smile at the child, give a pat on the back of the child, giving a thumbs up. These are different ways. Please read the notes I have posted on your course page. There I describe the different methods of, and I've also mentioned them in the course of this video lesson. Okay, so those are the 2 types of reinforcement. Then under intermittent reinforcement, continuous reinforcement is a standalone. But under intermittent reinforcement, there are 4 types of intermittent reinforcement schedules. What are they? They are the fixed ratio reinforcement schedule, variable ratio reinforcement schedule, fixed interval reinforcement schedule, and variable interval reinforcement schedule. For fixed ratio reinforcement schedule, it involves an arrangement of providing reinforcement after a set or fixed, just that name, fixed number of responses. Ratio has to do with the number of responses. After a set number of responses has occurred, maybe you want to reinforce your student for after every 5 mathematical problems solved. After they solve every 5 mathematical problems, you reinforce them. After they solve every mathematical problems, you reinforce them. So when you look at the word fixed and ratio, fixed has to do with steady. It is set. And then ratio has to do with number of responses. I know why I'm emphasizing on this. By the time you go through the 4 schedules, it will help you to be able to differentiate between the 4. Then you have the variable ratio. Remember I said ratio means number of reinforcement. Number of responses. Number of correct responses. Yeah, and variable, you know what variable means? Is straightforward. Something that varies, is not consistent like the other one that is fixed. It's not fixed. It varies. So variable ratio reinforcement schedule is an arrangement of providing reinforcement after a varying number of responses has been made. Here, the number of responses needed to gain the reinforcement is not consistent. E.g., example, a student may be rewarded after maybe 3, you reward, then after another 5, you reward, then another 10, you reward, another 15, you reward, after solving maybe all this number of mathematical. So it's not consistent. It varies. What about fixed interval? We have left fixed ratio and variable ratio. What about fixed interval? Fixed interval reinforcement schedule. This is an arrangement when a behavior is reinforced at a set amount of time. Please note the difference. The other one's ratio has to do with the number of responses. Interval has to do with amount of time. It has to do with time. So when you say fixed interval, has to do with a set amount of time. You give reinforcement after a set amount of time. E.g., you praise your students after every 5 minutes or after every 10 minutes. What about variable interval reinforcement schedule? This is a kind of schedule in which reinforcement is provided at varying amount of time, variable interval, varying amount of time have, varying periods of time have passed. So it means that in this case, the reinforcement is irregular, it's not consistent. So I hope you are able to get the distinction between the 4 types of intermittent schedules. So if you do, let's continue. What are the educational implications of Skinner's theory? Please look at it. It's very, even without looking at them, you can, I trust you can give me up to 3, 4 of the implications of how you think the theories can be applied in the classroom situation. Reinforcement is an essential factor if the student must perform well. Yes, we all agree on that. Give more of reinforcement, it will encourage the student to do more. Yeah. So as a teacher, please don't neglect the use of positive reinforcement. And you should reinforce positive behaviors through a variety of incentives, such as verbal praise, as I've said before, a smile, social recognition, a pat on the back, prize, or by giving marks. These are various ways you can give reinforcement. And then use negative consequences, that is, use negative reinforcement for unacceptable behaviors. Use appropriate techniques to punish bad behavior. When I mean the word there, punish, doesn't mean you should use corporal punishment, please. Remember, there is also negative punishment. Yes, give, like the student that I cited before, that is kept in the classroom, detained in the classroom during break time, in order to remove that element of enjoyment of the football that he plays, you know, just to deprive the child from enjoying the football time play, you know. So you keep a student in the class. In that case, you didn't apply corporal punishment, you applied negative punishment. So that is the sense in which punishment is used in this last point. And then we are told not to use corporal punishment or humiliation to correct bad behavior, because it will backfire. So second activity before the final point. Identify 2 shortcomings in our educational system, which Skinner's theory can help to correct. Yes, look at Skinner's theory and relate it with what is happening. Is there any shortcoming you can notice in your classroom setting, or in our educational system in general, that Skinner's theory can help us to correct? Ponder on this question, and then, you know, let's discuss that maybe during the discussion forum. Let's discuss that. So I want to believe that with what we have said in this lesson, with the Thorndike's theory of connectionism and Skinner's theory of operant conditioning, you should be able to apply some of the principles of these theories in the classroom situation. So with that, we'll come to the end of this lesson. Thank you very much, and bye for now. Yeah, bye-bye.